Happy Arvo. Hello. Thank you so much for joining me today. How are you? Especially you, Fletcher. Whoa, that was cool. Fletcher sent in this video. Compulsory. I don't know why I can't say that word. Voting, Australia. I heard about this, in a video, I think a couple months ago, that you guys are required to vote in Australia, which is a very interesting concept. Fletcher says, what do you think of this? Like, should America steal this? Interesting question. Very interesting question. Here in America, we have a lot of campaigns and stuff. There's ads on TV around voting season. Get out and go vote. You get a sticker. I voted today. Yay, go vote. Facebook will be like, go vote. I don't know why they care if I vote. But intuitively, my initial thoughts are like, if you're too lazy to go vote, I don't know if I want you voting. But on the flip side, if everybody voted in America, I think the outcomes would be so different. So different. So it's an interesting question. Because a big part of it is that you don't get off on voting day, you don't get off work. You know what I mean? You have to ask off work. Like take a vacation day, which is kind of absurd. And so a lot of the working class don't vote. The biggest class of people that vote are like the oldest population, like retired people. So that really skews the results. So I don't know. It's an interesting topic. I want to learn more about it.
If you're joining us for the first...
And this video is by Unboxing Economics. 32 subscribers. Go check out his channel, link down below.
First time, hello and welcome.
Hello.
If you are a returning supporter and friend, welcome back. This is Unboxing Economics. Today we'll be talking about compulsory voting in Australian federal elections.
Is it only in the federal elections?
We will discuss a brief history and why it was introduced, arguments for and against compulsory voting, a discussion on civil responsibilities.
All right, let's get to it.
In Australia.
Sounds great. I'm just skipping ahead.
Chile, Peru, Singapore, Thailand, Turkey, Uruguay. With Peru, Ecuador, Brazil.
I assume these are places that also have the same thing.
Having optional compulsory voting if you are illiterate or over 70. Liechtenstein has compulsory voting but has no penalty for not voting. Each jurisdiction has slightly different voting.
How does it work if there's no penalty for not voting? It's an interesting concept right there. I wonder how that changes the amount of people that come out and vote. If you say, you have to vote, but if you don't, there's no penalty.
Conditions and eligibility. Each country has different penalties and attitudes toward people abstaining from the vote. Now let's look at some arguments for compulsory voting. Low voter turnout equals less representative government, which makes the practical functionality of democracy more difficult and less effective. This is one of the simplest and most basic of all civic responsibilities. A duty to have an opinion. You play a small role in the making of the country, and the country contributes to who and what you are. Part of the reason for the introduction.
Can you show up to the vote and abstain in Australia?
From an Australian point of view, was to increase engagement and participation in the administration and running of the state by the public.
Because that's part of what I think about it is like, what if I genuinely don't like anyone on the ballot? What if I'm like, well, here in America, you can write in a candidate. Maybe you can do that there too. I guess that's an option. But if not, if you don't have an opinion on who should hold the office, I feel like you should be able to abstain. Maybe you have to show up still, but you can abstain.
In Australia, non-compliance is very minor, only around 10%, which does not represent a major infraction.
See, here in America, the majority of people don't vote, which is crazy.
Upon one's freedom.
I think that's accurate. Hold on, let me look that up. Okay, I was wrong. At least for presidential elections, about 66% of voting eligible population turned out in 2020. But still, it's only 2/3 of people. An entire huge portion of the country doesn't show up. And for other elections, oh man, I bet it's pitiful the amount of people that show up.
Even for those who choose not to participate. Another argument in favour of compulsory voting is that marginalised groups are encouraged to have their opinions heard so the government can have full information of how the state ought to be run. Historically,
That's sort of an interesting concept because there definitely are people who are like, what's the point in voting because I know whoever I vote for isn't going to win. But I think that's it's a little bit of a faulty logic because, for your candidate to even have a chance, y'all need to get out there and vote for him. You can't just all sit at home and say, he's not going to win, so why bother?
people of low socioeconomic backgrounds, people of lower education, non-English speakers, other marginalised or minority groups have historically had less involvement in the political process. Compulsory voting significantly assists policymakers in putting forward broader and more representative policies. Moreover, if a candidate knew only particular citizens would vote, given the option to abstain, those candidates would tailor their policies to the smaller and narrower group of likely voters. And lastly, nations that have high or full voter participation.
It almost feels like it becomes a cycle, like a positive feedback loop where only a certain population votes, so those politicians all focus on that population, and that neglects a large part of the population and further makes it so that only those people vote. You know what I mean? Like a cycle. That does seem bad.
Tend to have lower corruptions or potential for corruption. Now let's look at arguments against compulsory voting. To force people to vote is a form of compelled speech and thus a violation against freedom of expression. This idea would very much fly in the face of a westernised liberal democracy. There is some...
I guess that's where the option to abstain comes in as maybe being the argument, against this, the counter argument. It is a compulsory... That is interesting to think about. But I think if you have the option to abstain, it's fine.
Evidence to suggest elections where there is no compulsory voting are cheaper to administer for two reasons. One, there is no fines to be handed out, and number two, there needs to be less stringent supervision about who is voting, simply that an individual is registered to vote and has not voted multiple times in that same election. Another compelling argument against compulsory voting is that
those arguments are kind of weak.
Increased number of votes within the same jurisdiction does not necessarily lead to an improved quality of government or candidates. This argument depends on local...
See, now that might be true because, like I said, the people who don't want to vote, do you really want them influencing who gets elected? Because that's probably a good portion of those people are probably highly ignorant. And so they don't even care. You know what I mean? If they're not even showing up to vote, then I doubt they've done any research on who to vote for.
Okay.
They're just gonna go like this. You.
In Australia, we have a two-party preferred system where this argument could be made. Is a better outcome achieved by 20 million votes for two parties, more so than 12 million votes for those same two parties? Perhaps not. This argument does not hold in countries like the UK, which has several smaller but still major parties. The argument could well be the opposite, that more votes could indeed lead to a better outcome. An interesting side note about the two-party preferred system: compulsory voting, regardless of the arguments, is very unlikely to ever be removed from Australia. This is because both the major parties get some money from the Australian Electoral Commission, funded via the taxpayer, for each vote they receive. If both...
Whoa. That is interesting. They get money for every vote. Trying to think of the implications of that.
Major parties are for an existing policy.
It kind of makes sense. It kind of gives a smaller party who doesn't have much resources a chance to, you know, it definitely gives you a reason to show up, even even if you know your party's not going to win. If you know that, they're not going to win, but still by showing up and voting for them, you're giving them more resources in the future. I like that.
That they both benefit from, then why would they strike it down? The current rate is $2.62 per vote. Just over $62 million was distributed after the 2016 election. The Commonwealth Electoral Act,
that's pretty cool,
was passed in 1902. Since then, the electoral
1902
process has been administered by several different departments.
Is that when he said the compulsory voting was made? 1902.
The Australian Electoral Commission, AEC, was introduced in its current form in 1984 for the purpose of running and administering elections at a federal level. Each state has its own equivalent electoral authority. These are politically neutral and are publicly funded. If your objection to voting is the time taken or the fines associated, then I'm not sure how to respond to that position. Let's talk a little bit about civil responsibilities. There are 4 main civil responsibilities in Australia. Number 1, jury duty. Number 2, paying taxes and generally abiding by the law. Number 3, defending Australia when required. And number 4,
defending Australia when required. That's pretty badass. I've never heard that for America, as far as a civic duty. Defend America when required. I've never heard that. It's kind of badass sounding.
4, voting. I consider all of these a very small price to pay to live in a country as well run, as safe, and with as much liberty as Australia. Many modern people talk extensively.
Yeah, it makes me think every law in some way, just by being a law, infringes on your freedom of expression. Hey, I want to freely express myself by killing this guy. You can't do that. So, it's okay to infringe on the freedom of expression sometimes. And maybe voting is a good... Yeah, I think it's fine, especially if you have the option to abstain.
About their civil rights and infringements of their own individual freedoms. But very little is spoken about the extent to which those rights only come about because of civil responsibilities. On a personal level, I do not consider voting to be a right. I consider it to be a civil duty, an obligation to contribute to
interesting distinction.
One's country.
That was a very fun video. I think it's a very interesting topic to think about. Should America steal it? I don't know. That's a really tough one. Should they steal it? Man. I wish I could run a simulation and see, if everybody had voted in all the previous elections, what would the results have been? The different results. If everybody was informed on the issues and voted accordingly, then I think it's a great thing. But it's when you compel people to vote who are just ignorant, that's where it becomes a little bit questionable. Very interesting topic to me. I like it. Thanks for sending that in. I'm going to have to think about that. Hey, I told you to go to your room. Good job. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sending that in. I'll see you guys tomorrow.